The pleasure of introducing should be given to Dr. Rajesh Telly also. That was the reason, But you
That's
can
quite all right. That's quite all right.
Like the
You may
slides
proceed
I can include.
without the slides.
So Dr. Tejas Shah is a consultant diabetologist in Mumbai. He's been practicing there for a long time. I think the slide set is coming up. He is a known national faculty across all formats. He is a elder brother. He's fished me out in a lot of troubles. But I could say one thing for Tejas, which is over and above any meetings. He's a man with a golden heart. This I can tell up front, and I've always seen him, and he's a man with a golden heart. I think that is what the introduction I always think of Tejas, rather than any degrees, anything that one can acquire. I think that would be my introduction.
Thank you so much, Mithun. Thank you, Dr. Rajesh. Should I share my screen?
Yes, please. So we request RX Events to, please start it.
First of all, a big thank you to dear Bansi for having me and inviting me every time for these meetings. I think if he's a man with I don't know how many thousands of watts of energy that he's able to do meetings after meetings with such elan and with success, and really a big congratulations to Bansi Bhai for that. And as continuing with what Dr. Brij Makkar had said, that if there was really an award for outstanding contribution to the field of diabetes this year, definitely would have gone to Bansi Bhai for doing such wonderful events.
Thank you, Tejas.
And thank you, Mithun, for your words. My dear brother Mithun is also. So starting off with my presentation, yes, my talk is going to be related to managing glycemic variability with AGIs in the Indian scenario. As Dr. Bridget said, this is an Abbott symposium, and thank you, Abbott, for the same. So traditionally, we have been always speaking about fasting blood sugars, postprandial blood sugars, and HbA1c as the gold standards for managing, or as the gold standards for assessing the diabetes control in our patients. And that is our aim in order to make sure that we avoid the complications. But as the years have gone by, what we now know is that as we are using better drugs, as we are using newer drugs, we get new knowledge in the field of diabetes. What we now also know that there are certain different parameters related to monitoring, which have also overtaken or which are additionally added, we can say, and that is one of them is glycemic variability. Measurement of glycemic variability is something which is now turned very, very important. So SMBG was the traditional approach that we have been using. We are still using, no doubt. It's an equally important aspect to manage, especially as Mithun mentioned in his presentations also, that in an Indian scenario, you cannot overtake these traditional methods. Something which tells us about our daily doses of rapid acting and daily doses of bolus that our patient needs to take, looking at the SMBG at a particular time of the day. But what we know is that SMBG does miss out on certain important peaks and troughs which may occur in between the measurement levels that a patient does. Traditionally, like for example, a patient has a severe hyperglycemic peak at night, or a severe hypo at 5 o'clock in the morning, or a pre-dinner surge or a post-dinner surge which occurs, which might not be recorded in the SMBG. And therefore, there are certain limitations which an SMBG may not be able to detect. Similarly, we know that the role of HbA1c is equally important in our management. The correlation of HbA1c with the glycemic control, the correlation of HbA1c with the chronic complications has developed since the time the DCCT and UKPD data came out, and it told us that even a 1% change in HbA1c leads to a decrease of almost 37% of microvascular complications and a decrease of 14% reduction of myocardial infarction. But also what we now know is that HbA1c again cannot tell us everything. There could be certain aspects which HbA1c misses. It primarily displays only an approximate measure of glucose level, but fails to address parameters like hypoglycemia and the variability that may happen in an individual. Its ability is limited per se to reflect short-term glycemic changes, and it cannot reflect the postprandial hyperglycemias and fasting hyperglycemia separately sometimes. Traditionally, there may be two people or two patients with the same HbA1c, similarly like you see in this graph here, with an A1c of 8.8, but one patient may have severe changes, so severe hypers and hypoglycemias, and because of the hypo and hyper peaks, the A1C may still come out to be 8%, and a person with a lower glycemic variability may still have the same HbA1c. So sometimes it does not differentiate between two patients having the same HbA1c, but misses out on the peaks and troughs. There are certain conditions where HbA1c may not be give us the correct picture or may not come out right. Conditions like severe anemia, hemoglobinopathies, iron deficiencies, pregnancies, etc. sometimes fail to give us the accurate HbA1cs and may again rule out or the acute glycemic excursions of hypo and hyperglycemias. So over a period of time, gradually from fasting PP and HbA1c, we came to CGMS. CGMS is something which has become an important tool now in measurement again for our patients. The utility of A1C can be enhanced with the help of a CGMS is what the consensus in 2000s came out with. CGMS might again help us to detect the difference in between two individuals, or between, it may tell us the intraday variation, it may tell us the interday variations. Similarly, if you see the CGM here between two patients at an A1C of 7.7, where there may be severe hyperglycemia peaks occurring here, but more stable glucose range in this patient, and it has the ability to tell us much better about the glucose variability and patterns and trends. So glycemic variability is something primarily, basically what we mean is the swing in blood glucose. The broad definition of glycemic variability per se accounts for the intraday and interday glycemic excursion that happens between the hyper and hypoglycemias. And the hyperglycemia and the dysglycemia, the peaks and the nadirs that lead to various micro and macrovascular complications related to diabetes. There are now studies which have even come up which tells us that it is not the acute or the chronic persistent rise, but the acute fluctuations in blood glucose, which are more responsible for the severe complications that occur in a person with diabetes. The basic mechanisms why glycemic variability lead to complication is simple. It is the basis of hyperglycemia, the dysglycemia, which is persistently there in individuals. The dysglycemia per se again leads to the complications of micro and macrovascular mainly by two methods, the oxidative stress and the excessive glycation that occurs in an individual. The oxidative stress primarily generated by the hyperglycemia. There is the increased mitochondrial ROS production, which leads to a chain of reactions leading to activation of various pathways, the PKC pathway, the diacylglycerol, which all lead to increased microvascular complications like neuropathy and retinopathy. On the other hand, the hyperglycemia leads to, again, the advanced glycation of end production. There is the activation of the polyol and the exosamine and the PKC pathways leading to increased sorbitol production, which leads to further complications and further increased incidence of neuropathy and nephropathy. So when we look at a patient with either a persistent hyperglycemia or a patient with the multiple fluctuations of glycemia, we now know that the multiple fluctuations of glycemia in a same individual could be more harmful than a simple episode of severe acute hyperglycemia or a more chronic stable hyperglycemia. And this has been proved in clinical trials with the help of CGMS also, and its correlation with the micro and macrovascular complications. There are several important studies which came out, which again showed us the evidence regarding the impact of variability and its implications. The data from DCCT trial, which when they correlated the SMBG data, the 7-point SMBG data showed that there is an increased association with CV risk. The Verona diabetes study, again, which was a study which mainly looked at the epidemiology and the prevalence in a certain group of population from a Verona city, showed that glycemic variability had a greater effect than degree of the metabolic control on survival in elderly group of population here. It looked at around more than 5,000 population in this. A Dove study, which was again a study done in the elderly group of population, laid stress of importance of hypoglycemia and its relation to glucose variability and its impact on cardiovascular risk. So over a period of time, what changed was that in spite of the data being there with glycemic variability, there was still a very different ways of measurement of variability. The standardization was not there, and many clinical trials still interpreted the variability differently. So in 2017 and 19 came out the consensus came out regarding the time in range, and it put the time in range, it was identified as a metric of glycemic control that provides more actionable information than A1C alone. The time in range mainly, it includes three important measurements. It includes the percentage of readings and the time per day within the target range. It includes the time below the target range and the time above the target range. And so the primary goal of therapy or primary goal of good control is to have the maximum amount of time in the time in range or TIR while reducing the amount of time below range or the time above range. So when we talk about time in range, what has been standardized is a level of 70 to 180 is more or less standardized by the consensus as the time in range, or what should be the range for most of the group of population. Sometimes in certain population like pregnancy and elderly, that range can change. The time in range is the amount time above the target range of 180. Again, that is split into three. From 180 to 250 is considered to be a mild. From 250 and above is considered to be severely above, and the stage 3 is where the patient may have complications like ketoacidosis. Similarly, the time in below range is something below 70, where 70 to 54 is considered as grade 1, 54 and below is severe, and grade 3 is where patients may require an external support or assistance to revive. There is some confusion, or there was some discussion regarding the importance of time in range and its association with complications, because there are not enough studies which showed that the time in range is directly associated with prevention of complications. So this was a paper which was published very recently in 2019, which talked about which looked at the data from DCCT. They looked at the incidence of retinopathy and microalbuminuria in patients who had done the SMBG profile, 7-point SMBG profile, where in the DCCT study, they did the SMBG profile, they did retinopathy assessment every 6 months and microalbumin every year. And what they found out that for every 10% or 10-point change in the time in range, the association of retinopathy increased by almost 64% and association of microalbuminuria by 40% almost. That means the number of times a person remains above the time in range, the chances of retinopathy and microalbuminuria clearly increased over a period of time. There was a direct relation between time in range and A1C put forth by consensus. If you look at these two studies in type 1 and type 2 individuals, where it has assessed that if a person remains in 70% of the time in range, where it has a correlation to A1C of approximately 7%, while if the person is only at 20% time in range, the A1C comes to somewhere around 9.4. So time in range is where more than 70% is what type 1 diabetics and type 2 diabetics should aim for. And every 10% increase in time in range is associated with around 0.5% increase in A1C and around 0.8% increase in A1C in type 2 diabetics. So in the consensus in 2019 put forth specific levels for special group of people. So in type 1 and type 2, 70% of the time you should be in time in range, where the time in range is 70 to 180. Approximately the percentage of readings should be less than 4% in the time below range, less than 1% for below 54. And for elderly, the time in range again differs. 50% of the time should be in the time in range of 70 to 180 because of the increased risk of hypoglycemia. Pregnancy, the targets are different. The range is brought down to 70 to 140, and almost 90% of the time it should be in the time in range. So this is the broad summary of the targets in different population is what has been put forward. As you see here, pregnancy, around more than 90% of the time in gestational diabetics and type 2, you should be in time in range of 70 to 140. While in elderly, the changes are different, 50% in time in range here between 70 to 180. This is what a classical AGP report should look like, where it should give a picture about a percentage of time in range depending on how high or low the patient has remained. It should mention about the ambulatory glucose profile with a summary of glucose values to be given, and overall the daily glucose profiles also should be mentioned so that the patient can assess. Now coming to postprandial hypoglycemias, what we know traditionally is that Indians is a carbohydrate-rich country. Now, if you look at the physiologic profile of in a normal person, more or less a postprandial phase is something which lasts from somewhere around from the time of ingestion food to up to 4 hours. where the conversion of oligosaccharides and disaccharides to monosaccharides takes place. The post-absorptive phase is from the end of the postprandial phase, that is from 4 hours to approximately 10 hours, where the hepatic glucose output takes over and the absorption of glucose in the circulation takes place. And so traditionally, the fasting period actually comes in the last 2 to 3 hours of the day only. So if the person is eating, say, more than 3 meals a day, traditionally he spends almost 8 to 12 or more than 14 hours of the time in the postprandial period. And that's why the postprandial period becomes very, very important when we are looking at us controlling the blood sugars. Per se, when a person eats 3 meals a day, it's the post-breakfast, the post-lunch, and the post-dinner peaks or the excursions which happen in an individual that we see normally, and they are the ones which we are trying to bring it down. Glycemic variability and PPG again is something which we look beyond a traditional control. The postprandial excursions which takes place keep increasing if the patient is eating especially more carb meals in a day. The duration of postprandial hyperglycemia per se contributes to the chronic hyperglycemia, and the magnitude of postprandial rise that happens directly affects the glucose variability. So this is more or less like a vicious cycle where a person will traditionally have a higher postprandial peak or high post-breakfast and a post-lunch peak. Time glucose will ultimately lead to a higher fasting glucose and invariably leading to a higher HbA1c. So the link between glycemic variability and PPG is direct. The reduction in fasting and postprandial blood sugar is what we want to achieve. Reduction in HbA1c is want to achieve. And the third important aspect is the reduction in the glucose variability, which is again an equally important aspect. If you look at our Indian diet, and if you ask the diet history of what a patient eats from morning to night, traditionally from breakfast, lunch, and dinner, primarily we are eating more and more carbs. It could be from any part of the country. It could be a North Indian eating a paratha, or a South Indian eating an idli, or a West Indian eating a chapati, or from anywhere. It is traditionally carb-rich diet which a person consumes. There is less of multigrain, there is less of low glycemic index food, there is less of high magnesium calcium intake happening in these individuals, and therefore the rich carbohydrate accounts for the 90% of total variability that happens, and that's the reason we get the higher glycemic response. Traditionally, we want to curb this surge in blood glucose by one thing is by changing the diet pattern. Very low carb diets again are not recommended, as we know, in diabetics, and they are not something which are very easy to follow. We need drugs specifically which target postprandial blood sugars better. The conventional anti-diabetic therapies with all the armamentarium that we have. The IDF recommends a goal of not to exceed 140. ADA and RSSDI recommends the patients with the postprandial goal of less than 180, more or less. Reduction of fasting glucose, reduction of A1C, and controlling the PPG, all three are equally important. Alpha glucosidase per se have become an important tool to manage or to reduce the postprandial blood sugars. They have a role mainly because they work in a different pattern. They reduce the intraday and interday glucose variability. They are effective as monotherapy, especially newly diagnosed patients. Studies have been done with alpha glucosidase in patients even with impaired glucose tolerance, and they have shown to have a reduction in terms of progression to diabetes. They can be easily combined with OHAs and insulin. They have no relation in terms of secretion of insulin and therefore cannot cause hypoglycemia or weight gain. As we know, they work mainly by delaying the absorption of carbohydrates. They can delay the conversion of oligosaccharides and disaccharides to monosaccharides by binding to the alpha glucosidase enzymes. And therefore, traditionally in Indian rich diets, they are the ones which really bring down or curb the rise in postprandial blood sugars. The amount of postprandial reduction that is normally seen is somewhere around 45 to 50 milligrams in most of the patients when we use this drug. So Moglibos per se is a drug we know is used in combination with all oral drugs and insulin. It is a first-line drug per se, an add-on therapy on the daily glycemic excursion in type 2 diabetic patients who are already on metformin and sulfonylureas. The primary aim of this study was to look at the glycemic excursions, its effect on MAGE of Moglibos, and the reduction of postprandial blood sugars. Patients, around 100 patients, were enrolled in this study on a stable dose of metformin or metformin plus sulfonylurea combination with an A1C of more than 7, or had to have two readings of more than 140 of postprandial sugars. CGMS was done at various intervals before starting the study, during the maintenance phase, and the follow-up phase. The patients were called at 14-day and at 14-week interval, at the end of the study at the 6 months. Subjected to voglibose 0.2 milligrams or 0.3 milligrams 2 or 3 times a day. Showed a significant lowering of glycemic excursion at day 14 as well as week 14 with voglibose arm when it was added to metformin SUs or with metformin. Overall, it showed a difference in terms of time in range, also a significant increase in percentage time spent with the target glucose range and a significant decrease in percentage time spent with the target glucose range or in the above range. Significantly lower in the voglibose arm during the 3 hours following meal, which clearly showed a better effect. And the MAGE and the HbA1c, which was assessed at the end of the study, showed a significant difference from baseline from 7.5 to 6.9, and the MAGE was also considerably reduced in the voglibose plus metformin and SU arm. So to conclude, voglibose therapy was associated with an increase in time spent within the target range of 70 to 180, with no further increase in hypoglycemia and weight gain. Voglibose therapy is an add-on to metformin and metformin plus SU. It reduces glycemic variability, it reduces the lowering of fasting and HbA1c, and reduced blood glucose level throughout 24 hours as was seen in this study, and can be considered as a safe and effective add-on option in type 2 diabetes. Thank you very much.